Okay, so today I have a special guest, and I swear I'm gonna butcher it. So his name is Joseph Yrachete. Did I say it right?
Yep, that's right.
Oh, yay! Okay, so I really wanted to bring you on because some of the things that you are teaching me privately, like the things that you're explaining to me, has been like pretty eye-opening. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna share this shit. Anyway, let me just say this, guys, before I'm gonna let this guy talk, is that we didn't meet on friendly terms. We met kind of like in this, I'm in a Chichimeca group, and somebody introduced that race was a social construct, and I was like, what? And I kind of challenged it, and then he came on, and we were going back and forth, and we didn't like each other for a minute, and then we got to having a private conversation, and like I like to say, like Tupac, is that real recognizes real, so to speak. So I think he thought that I was one of those people who are just kind of like, prancing around with the label, but not really doing the work. And I think he realized that I am at least trying to learn, right? And I realized that this dude is smart and that he's not just some dude trying to come at me at the comments, but he's actually an ally. So I convinced him to come on and teach me what he taught me the other day. So this is, say it again, Joseph.
Yracheta, but my family, when they moved to the States, anglicized it. I don't know why. They anglicized it to say Yracheta, so usually I say Yracheta, but for my Latino friends, I say Yracheta, because that's how you would say it there.
Right. And just a little bit of background. He has a master's degree and he's about to have a doctorate. I'll let him share on into what. But he also lives on the Lakota Reservation as he is married to a Lakota woman and has a lot of knowledge in that environment. And so we'll probably get into that. So tell us what you have your degrees in.
So I'm for all of you kids out there who think that you can't do that, you can't go to school and get a degree. I'm an old man. I'm 54 years old. I got my master's degree when I was 48 in pharmacogenomics from the University of Washington, Seattle, and I'm about to get my PhD in environmental health and engineering. I still do a lot of genetics, but really I'm a health disparity scientist. So I'm looking at all the different inputs, whether they're environmental, social, or genetic, that cause health disparity in Indigenous people of the Americas.
Mhm. And so that's gonna like lead me into the first question I'm gonna ask you, which is what I pretty much ask everybody that I talk to, because I think it's important. Identity, let me just say this, identity is important because it's a starting point. But if you stay there too long, then you don't make progress and it's just you're just claiming a label and you're not doing that processing, right? But what is it that you identify as? I know I didn't put that on the list.
I identify as uh, Indigenous, which I guess, there's no good word. The National Congress or the National Museum of the American Indian in DC had this fight before they opened their doors, because they had on their board, they had Hawaiians, they had Puerto Ricans, they had Mexicans, they had South Americans, they had American Indians, they had First Nations from Canada, they had Alaskans, and so they didn't know what to name it, because Native American, a lot of people don't like the word American attached to themselves. A lot of people don't like Native because at the time, just like now, white supremacists are like, well, I was born here, so I'm Indigenous and I'm Native. And so there's been they still opened it as Native American. And part of the fight was because, Native Hawaiians are American, they're part of the United States, but they're not Native American because they're not related ancestrally to the natives of both North and South America. But that's changing. I mean, there's some evidence that said they got here on a boat and they mixed with the people of Peru and Ecuador. Anyway, and then other people, of course, didn't want to have any Latin Americans be classified as Native American. So it just became a big fight. They got over it somehow and opened the doors. And so Amerind has had a bad rap, that name, because it wasn't our choice to be called Amerind, and it also has Indian in it. and Amerindigenous is kind of my own personal compromise because it has America in it, but it has Indigenous. My wife only goes by Lakota because she doesn't want to be an American Indian. She doesn't want to be a Native American. So that's how I identify first as Amerindigenous. I have blood all from Mexico, but since Mexico used to be part of the United States, or United States used to be part of Mexico, I do have some relatives that are now in Arizona and New Mexico. So, you know, a lot of us are like that, and probably even more so because there's a book out called The Other Slavery that talks about American Indian slavery that really started in Mexico and then kind of spread from there. So Mexico and then Peru and Ecuador and Chile, and then later to the Pacific Northwest, the northeast coast of the United States, and then Canada and the United States around the Great Lakes region. So what happened is the tribes were just less dense in the north, and they were more subject to war and infectious disease. And anybody that was left, usually children, got shipped either to the Caribbean or to Mexico to be slaves, because of course we were dying like crazy because they had either from disease or war, or they had us mining tin and silver and those mercury. Those things are really toxic and they just sent us in there. And so they had to replace people. And so the replacements in Latin America came from the north. So we're related to the people in the north. I mean, we were related before anyway, before Columbus got here, but we became even more related after these different economic ventures that Europeans did that they needed slaves for. And so, I mean, there's lots of, that's just one story of mixing. There's lots of stories where people north and south of the Mexican border have mixed. So I just try to honor that by lumping us all together. I know some people don't like to be lumped together because that's pan-Indianism, but you can't get away with the Europeans. They moved us around on boats. Same thing with Filipinos. Filipinos were moved to the west coast of Mexico, and they mixed with the tribes there. So, and
Wow, I didn't know that.
yeah,
My family, I think they're on the west, right? Jalisco's on the west, and they would always tell me I look Filipina, but I always thought it was maybe just the indigenous part of me, but maybe there's.
well,
But
yeah, it's hard.
I took
It's
a
hard.
blood test, right?
It's hard to figure out because there aren't enough genetic samples from either the Philippines or from Western Mexico, and nobody's ever done that study. But yeah, and there's a lot of natives from Mexico that, you know, I don't know if you want to call it a rumor or a myth, but a lot of us got shipped over to the Philippines and Southeast Asia because that's how they worked, right? That's to break us. They couldn't break us the way they did in the United States because there's too many of us. So the way they broke us is by splitting us up. A bunch of Yaqui got moved to the Yucatan with the Maya, figuring that they wouldn't get along, so they wouldn't have any way to form a coalition and create war against the Spanish. And then a bunch of Yaqui got shipped to the Philippines.
Wow.
Same idea is you just break them up, and they can't have enough numbers or, you know, language to fight.
Wow. That's interesting. And maybe there is some Filipina in me after all, right? Because that's what they always tell me. So
But
my
I identify as a Amerindigenous, but I also identify as Purepecha from Michoacan because my grandmother and my mom are all from Parandicuaro and Morelia.
Yeah, I have Purepecha ancestry, so I identify as Purepecha descent because I still feel like I have not been adopted by the tribe, and I'm not trying to speak for them. But there's some blood in me, right, on my mom's side. So the next
Can
question
I
is
stop
gonna
you a
be,
minute?
yeah,
That's the other thing that a lot of Latinos or Chicanos mistake is we're not tribes like the
mm,
tribes in the United States. Tribes more refers to a extended family, you know, because their tribes are usually highly related and they're very small units, and they have a system of government, but that's usually limited to only people in their tribe. In Mexico, for groups like the Mexica or the Maya or the Purepecha, sometimes they have a joint government, sometimes they don't. So like the Maya from Oaxaca and Chiapas don't really recognize the Yucatan Maya as, the same group. And same thing with the Purepecha. The Purepecha were like the United States. They took in a bunch of Chichimeca, they took in a bunch of Matlatzinca, they took in a bunch of Otomi, so technically all of those groups would be Purepecha, but then they also have their subdivision because they have a culture, they have a family of Otomi or Matlatzinca or something else. So they're under the umbrella of Purepecha because that was the government basically.
It's interesting you say that because I think that a lot of it, you're right. A lot of us do kind of think about the tribe. We're trying to respect that tribal sovereignty, and we don't want to step on people's toes if there's something that's still in existence. But sometimes some people even use that as a reason not to kind of attach to that way of life, right? So personally, like I said, I'll still say Purepecha descent, but I'll say Chichimeca. But going into what we're gonna say, what I wanted to ask you next is that, what would you say it
I'm
means?
so, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say, so for people in the United States to think about it, it'd be like uh, the Salish in the Pacific Northwest or the Iroquois, which are the Haudenosaunee in the Northeast, is they're a bunch of different tribes that decided to confederate. So they're still smaller tribes within this larger framework. So the Haudenosaunee is a mixture of 5 or 6 different tribes. Same thing with the Salish. They're different tribes, but they're under the one kind of banner. Or Anishinaabe are Ottawa, Potawatomi, and Chippewa or Ojibwe. So it's the same thing.
Oh,
Just want people to get to understand there's a level. There's your family, your extended family. There's a tribe, and then it just keeps going up from there as the group.
it's like the Chicano community, actually. It's like we were talking about that in the last podcast. It's like you got your immediate people in the household, then you've got the people that you invite to the barbecue, then you got the homies that you chill with, that you call, like I call people my uncle that are not my uncle, but they've been a part of the family. So I see what you're saying. It's like this level. It's very we were saying that in the last one, is that we really definitely live very indigenous, even in just our normal ways, that people don't realize that it comes from our people from the past. So I want to ask you, because you identify as Indigenous, what does it mean to identify as Indigenous? Like, what do you think that means to someone? Like, what are they doing? What are they saying? Like, break it down.
So I'm mostly speaking for myself,
Of course.
but I've had a lot of experience here in the States with different groups in Canada and Alaska, um, Hawaii, New Zealand, and in Mexico. And so it's a little bit different in every place. But I think the common factor among all of those places is that it's either continuation before colonization or a reclamation and a recovery from colonization. I think that's the biggest commonality. And it's basically rejecting what has been done to us and either trying to recover some of what was lost or start fresh, start something new, because a lot of Indigenous people lost everything, their language and their land and their customs, but start new and kind of reject any kind of European ideology or European way of knowing or European hierarchy, and try to be as fair and loving towards your relatives as possible. Because when you pick up that American identity, you become an individual and you become estranged from even your close family. Like, some tribal groups where they just reject their family. And I, with my Mexican family in Chicago and in California, it doesn't matter. You are always together. There's, even if you fight, you're always together. You can have a knockdown, drag out fight. You can punch each other. You can call each other's moms bad names, but you're always going to end up being together. And I've been all around this country, and as soon as another Mexican sees me and I can't speak Spanish or I speak it very badly, they feed me and they ask me if I'm okay, if I need a ride or if I need to stay at their house overnight. And I try to be the same way. So being Indigenous has a lot to do with kinship, and it has a lot to do with rejecting Western values.
Would you say that there's a spiritual component to being Indigenous? I know that's confusing because I know there's some people that still kind of buy into some of the Christianity ways that was fed to us, and up until recently I did too. But would you say that you have to kind of connect to something beyond what we see?
Yeah, those are hard conversations to have because they're really personal, and there's no one answer, there's no right answer. And anybody um, who wants to talk about those kinds of things really should be careful, because if you really do believe in this spiritual part of it, it's not something that you share widely, because that's meant for you and meant for your immediate family. It's not meant to be shared. So there's a lot of taboos for a lot of tribes about sharing stuff outside of the group, partly because it's sacred, but also because people use it against you. They'll um, say whatever, you're a Satanist, or say that you're silly, or say that you're don't know what you're talking about, or you're not really an Indigenous person. And so a lot of the people that I go to ceremony with, they're very honest. They're like, this is what I heard. This is what the spirits told me. If you don't like it, then you don't have to listen to it. Go to another ceremony and maybe you'll find what you're looking for. That being said, just because it is that kind of open doesn't mean that there's no kind of rules. I mean, you could be like an evangelical Christian and say, God told me that those people over there need to be murdered or something like that. No, it doesn't. You can't just say, I got a vision from God and God told me like that. But that's what sometimes you see people who are trying to reclaim their Indigenous identity is like, I was told to do such and such, which, first of all, you have to be careful when somebody says that, and second of all is what are they telling you? Does it make any sense? And that's the biggest thing. When I go to ceremony, they go, does this make sense? And I'm really like, yeah, I had a dream like that yesterday, it makes sense. Or no, that doesn't make any sense, but I'll think about it for a while. So yeah, there's a spiritual component. And since I'm a scientist, I also like to think about the way the human mind has evolved. And even if you are an atheist and you don't believe in spirituality, that's how we were developed, all of us, from monkeys until now. We developed that kind of mindset, and that helped us. What they call it now in science is serendipity. And serendipity is just that chance favors the prepared mind. And if you are somebody who's spiritual and you think about these things all the time, guess what? You're more likely to survive than people that don't think about these things all the time. So either way you look at it, if you want to look at it as something metaphysical, you can, or if you want to think about it as scientific and it's just a good way for your mind to work so that you can remember everything that you need to remember and treat people the way they should be treated so that you and your family survive. Either way, it's good.
Yeah, I when you were saying all that, I was thinking of something is that I try to tell people that it is, for me, it is a spiritual journey. It's beyond just a blood test. I heard the calling, even that blood test had nothing to do with, I heard the calling to me way longer than it was when I was pretty young, but I kind of wanted to ignore it because I was like, you know, it's going against my Christianity. I don't know, But when people start to ask me, well, what does it mean? And I'm like, that is something you and your ancestors, but you need to hear that. When they speak to you, you need to hear it. I don't know what they're going to tell you. Those are not my ancestors. They're your ancestors. And ancestors could be someone you knew. Like I think my grandma comes and talks to me all the damn time. Mija, don't eat that taco. You're gonna gain weight. It's gonna be on your hips. It's gonna be on your ass. And I could hear her sometimes, like, what? Shut up, grandma. Eat the fucking
It has
taco.
it has chicken. It has chicken from China in it. It's probably contaminated.
It's never chicken from China, homie. But it is a pork from, and that's not healthy for us. What happened? Oh, I think he went away. I think I'll end this and then we'll redo.